Good morning.
Good morning.
Today is another day for the. I don't even remember what we're called. What are we called?
This podcast we
Vagabond
do.
Gamecast.
Yes.
I was
It's
about to
also,
say. I
nor is
was
it
about
another
to
day.
call us Sprixelsoft.
Well,
uh,
that's going to be a topic one of these days, I think. But
yeah, not today. Um, so I've got a very bold statement I'm gonna make here.
let's hear it.
Tetris sucks.
Oh, that's like when people say like, I think you've said a similar thing, and it's cool with me totally. But people say like Citizen Kane sucks. And
Oh, I hate Citizen Kane. That's like that's
that's
what.
it. It's like you're gonna have a significant amount of people who agree with you and a significant amount of people who don't, and then blah 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 blah
Yeah,
blah. So I guess that's our topic for today, and that's what we're gonna go over is that kind of
Citizen
thing.
Kane.
Yeah, yeah, so, yeah, exactly, right. That was a tricky little lead in. It was done, well done.
Yeah, yeah. What's I actually will very briefly just talk about how much I hate Citizen Kane.
Let's hear it.
We so I went to animation school. Like I had to watch a lot of movies and whatnot, and so we had a film history class at one point, and of course one of the classes we had to, or one of the films we were required to watch and do a report on was Citizen Kane,
Okay.
which I had never seen before.
Okay.
And I gotta say, I can understand from a historical point of view how it accomplished things with cinematography that were outstanding for the time.
Okay.
But I feel that that movie does not hold up and age well by today's standards. If you've seen a lot of modern stuff and are used to seeing modern stuff.
What is it? The pacing, the storytelling, the
The
tension.
pacing, yeah, yeah. The overall pacing of it, I felt weird, and I can't even clearly remember what it was. I just remember at the time just being like really impatient as it's happening, and just frustrated that the story didn't really seem to be progressing.
You know what? I've been watching a lot of 70s movies lately. We have a little like film club at work kind of
Yeah.
sorts, I guess. And like I don't know why, but it's just happened to be a lot of 70s movies lately. And I find
Mm.
70s movies are paced in a very interesting way. They're very, by modern standards, very slow. And at first when you're
Yeah.
watching them, it's just like, God, come on. But after
Yeah.
watching them and watching them, I've just adjusted to it so much. It's like familiar in a way, and all of a sudden everything's very different. So I'm not
Yeah.
suggesting you go and watch like 100 movies from the 40s to like set a
Yeah. Yeah.
context, but I bet if you did, or if it was
I
the
mean,
40s
I've
right now, you'd feel very different.
the thing is, I have watched stuff from a variety of time periods, and it. I don't feel like it's so much that time period. I feel like it's that movie. I just don't like it.
Yeah.
Uh, but I don't know. Maybe it is just a fact. Like if I was there at the time, I would have appreciated it more. I actually had a very brief discussion with someone on a forum recently, kind of about the same thing with video games, because there was one
Okay.
person saying like video games don't age. They are what they are, and either you're just distracted by other things and like a sucky game, or I don't know. I don't remember exactly what he was saying, but it was like I was pointing to the example of like Zork or Adventure, and
Okay.
saying like these are examples that of games that were very important for their time, but they don't hold up today. Like they haven't aged well, and so a few other people were arguing for or against me.
Okay.
Um, so to an extent, I feel like that's kind of going back to what I'm saying with Tetris. But also Tetris just sucks.
I will warn you, I don't side fully on with really either side, but I certainly lean the other way from you
Yeah,
for sure. And Tetris sucks is a big statement.
yeah,
I mean, Tetris is not like my favorite game ever in the whole world or anything, but like I've found it to be, for what it is, um, a pretty fun little game. and then
Yeah.
I can see how Tetris entering into a Tetris-less world would have been. I can see why the phenomenon happened, right?
I think it really works, particularly at the time that it was, because there was no such thing as a mobile game at the time. Uh, and I think the Game Boy did a really solid job of at least popularizing Tetris in the fact that like it was kind of the same way that people play games now. It's a game that you can turn on, you can play
Yeah,
for a few minutes and not really get invested in and turn it off and while you're waiting for a bus or whatever.
it's the
Um,
original mobile game.
it's the original mobile game, I
Yeah.
guess. I mean, I'm sure the Game and Watch stuff, there's probably something there that holds credit for that, but uh, Tetris really exploded in popularity. People kind of saw it as an addictive thing. So I can appreciate it from a historical point of view, but that style of game typically does not interest me.
Right. I'm gonna say that's obviously where we differ, and that's kind of I think what we wanted to really discuss today
Yeah.
was how you put a lot more emphasis on I guess kind of the flavor, the
Mm.
setting, probably the kind of maybe the art and music and so forth. And while I love those things, for me I do put a lot of focus on the pure mechanics of the game, and also if that's not there, nothing about the flavor can save the game for me.
Yeah.
Uh,
Which I don't know. I can understand that and I can't. Because I've played games that have terrible broken bugs and stuff, and I've still been able to love the game.
can you give me an example?
Castlevania 2.
Castlevania 2. uh, I that's interesting as an example. To me, 1 and 3 in a flavor sense were more interesting.
I enjoyed the flavor a little bit, but uh, I loved the fact that it was like these towns that you were in,
Yeah.
and then you got to go into like a level, and then you got to go into a castle, and it was kind of like this open world thing that you could go around. So there are mechanics about that I liked, but like all the dialogue, at least in the English version, I never played the Japanese, but in English the dialogue was broken. Like
Beyond
people
belief.
outright lie to you about stuff that you're supposed to do. Um, and
Awesome.
then and then there's like cliffs that you just have to duck at for like 20 seconds or something stupid, and it's like no, like how are you supposed to figure that out, short of like reading a strategy guide that someone else wrote because the developers told them,
So
right?
what is it that made the game interesting to you? The towns and this the setting
Yeah,
kind of?
it was the flavor, the music I thought was absolutely outstanding.
It was actually.
Like
It was very much.
I loved the I don't know, you just start off and immediately the music is great, and then you go out and like there was like that. I know in retrospect it was terrible to have to wait for the day night transitions,
Sure.
but that flavor of it going to night and the music changing and things being harder and stuff like that felt really cool to me.
Right. So if I can interject quickly, I think so. To me, there's times when flavor is just a pretty coating on the mechanics, and there's times when, like, and maybe this is a stretch, and you might roll your eyes a little, but I feel like times where the flavor kind of is a mechanic almost. Like if they're trying to establish a mood, yes, it's
Yeah.
flavor, but I think that's like I would include that in my side from the way I look at things with like it being kind of a mechanic. Like when I play Silent Hill, it's a horror
Yeah.
game, right? So the flavor is kind of what the game it is an element of kind of the mechanic they're trying to accomplish, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So here, yeah, that's like the music
They're,
and
they're
kind of
not they're not 100% separable.
exactly. And I think there is times when maybe they kind of are. Like I think if you were playing, let's go back to Tetris for example, and it was like
Mm.
they put some coating on that. You know, you're building a spaceship or something. Like, that's just pure flavor, right? Like Tetris could and has existed without anything of the sort. And that's what I really just don't need is that flavor. Like a pure Tetris with like a Tetris on like a calculator or something would be just as well to me, kind of, right? I mean, of course, the
Yeah.
flavor is nice, and I can appreciate it, but I don't. It doesn't make the game significantly better to me to have it there, I guess. So Castlevania 2, with you talking about the music and stuff, I think they went for this feel of like kind of open world. You're on your own, go out there and do what you got to do. And they intentionally, I guess, put a little bit of focus on that, since the previous game in the series was very different and it was like stage
Mm.
based. And so I wouldn't call it a mechanic, but for me, I can see that as being important to accomplishing what the game set out to accomplish.
Yeah.
I guess the stronger argument, like we had of course offline kind of touched on a few things, and I brought up Lunar, which,
Yeah.
yeah, I said I hate that shit, and I think you said you enjoyed it. I'm not gonna put words in your
You know,
mouth.
I did like it. And what's weird is I played that game through completion, and it must have been in 1996 or maybe 1997. I can't remember which, but
Okay.
I barely remember anything about the game.
Ooh, I remember.
I basically remember that it was an RPG and it was incredibly anime.
Yes.
And at
Yes.
that point, I hadn't watched any anime, so like the idea of like tropes being overdone and stuff, I had no basis for that.
That was a lot of people in the West in like the 90s, when it was like, oh, look at this genre, wow. And now it's like, yeah, it's I've already been living this for 30 years, 20 years, with, the tropes, as you
Yeah.
say, are just so evident.
So I remember there being like a cat girl and stuff in it, and at that point, like it's just something I hadn't seen before, so I was able to just take it as something completely fresh, and
Hmm.
I remember liking it.
So I totally hated it. I found it. I have the same problem with, like, say, Breath of Fire, which I think interestingly you also brought up previously. But
Hmm.
anyway, it's just, it feels like the game designers. I mean, I have no idea, of course, but I feel like they said, like, hey, we have this really cool world and this cool story we want to tell. Great, let's make a game out of it. But what's the game gonna be?
Mm.
Let's figure that out. And then it's like they sat down and played all these other RPGs and said, okay, this is our game. Let's just put our story on top of this.
Mm.
And sometimes, I mean, maybe that works. It might not be the most interesting game. It's just that same game again with a different story in a way. But like,
Yeah.
especially I found Lunar, and to a lesser degree Breath of Fire, to be just bland. Like, I felt like I was just doing mundane tasks again and again to get them to feed me this story they had built,
Mm.
right? And especially Lunar, I mean, why not make a TV series or something? Like, I just didn't
Yeah.
get why I had to walk through this level, do this fight, press the buttons, walk through this level, do the fight, compared to, say, certain games. I don't know, some of the Final Fantasies, which were more tactical, and you had to make choices in battles that were, you had to customize your party in a certain way to make it fun, where that was
Mm.
entirely absent from, say, Lunar. It was so pointless to me. It was like literally just doing mundane tasks to be fed more story, which,
Mm.
in a way, one could argue games in general kind of are that. You're doing tasks, you're being fed story. But if the tasks are interesting and you're engaged, then it
Yeah.
feels good to get through that and then be fed kind of be rewarded with the next chunk of story. Whereas when it's
Yeah.
mundane and it's the same game you've already played a million times, I just don't find that interesting. No flavor can save that for me.
Yeah. So I guess at that point, though, it kind of comes down to like your preference in books, right? Like, there's no mechanical difference between uh, Gone with the Wind, the book, and Twilight, the book. They're both words on paper that you read in sequence,
Sure.
but obviously the flavor is completely different, right?
Well, it's
So
pure flavor in a way.
yeah.
Really,
So
right?
so to me, like, I can understand if you find that the story in Lunar is not interesting to you, and because it's not doing anything mechanically revolutionary, there's just no win for you at all. Uh, but I guess that's where we differed. Is I remember enjoying the story itself. So because I enjoyed the story, it didn't bother me that it wasn't breaking any new ground mechanically.
I feel very different for sure. So a game I tend to uh, mostly talk well about, is Xenogears, for example, and I really enjoyed the
Yeah.
story. But there was long stretches of that game that were very hard for me because I was bored out of my mind.
Yeah.
I was playing for the story. There's
Right.
so the game is kind of hybrid in a way where
So
like
when you say bored, do you mean because of the story or because
no,
of
the story was interesting to me, but then I'd get in some level and I'd have to walk through some dungeon or whatever. And it
right.
would just be like, I like these characters. I'm interested. I just kind of want to maybe finish this game, but it's another one of
Right.
these dungeons, right? And like there was kind of two. There was you fight as humans, but then you also have like each human has a robot they can like fly around in and do stuff in. And when you get in the
Mm,
robots, the battles were more fun, and
mm,
it was interesting just because they worked a little differently. But the human part, which was probably 3/4 of the game, was more like standard RPG stuff, and that was just not that interesting to me. And it was such a significant portion of the game. That was one of the things that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth.
mm,
I just wish they'd made that more interesting. I don't know. Like,
mm.
imagine when Chrono Trigger came out. It wasn't, yeah, it was another, I guess, what do they call them now? JRPG or whatever. Like what I simply called RPGs at the time. And it was, I guess, for the layman, perhaps very similar to Final Fantasy. But they did enough different things that playing it,
Yeah.
like just purely sitting down and playing it, was just fun. Whereas
Yeah.
I didn't get that out of like, oh, a new Breath of Fire 2. Yeah, it's the same stuff again, right?
Well, it was interesting because so like Breath of Fire, I don't remember what sort of new mechanics they had in the original one, but I remember with
Totally
the
nothing at
second
all.
one,
What was it,
well,
hunting or something? I don't even remember. You could fish. You could.
in I think you could fish in the first one, and then they expanded that into the second one, and you can hunt and you can fish, and you have to like build your own city, and like
Hmm.
depending on how you interact with NPCs, that city gets built differently. Um, so I felt like there was a lot of cool stuff mechanically going on in that world. Um, and I have no idea where I was going with that thought. What were we talking about immediately before that?
uh, just how
Oh,
like say Chrono Trigger was a
right,
better
Chrono
game to
Trigger.
me than Breath of
So,
Fire because of the mechanics they
so
chose.
yeah. So one thing is that like the battle mechanics and stuff weren't really any different for Breath of Fire. Like that was kind of just the same as Final
Generic
Fantasy IV,
RPG,
right? Yeah,
art
generic
design.
RPG.
Yeah.
But and it was if I remember correctly, it was a reasonably difficult game too. Like you had to
Hmm.
grind for levels and
You
stuff.
did. Yeah.
And so something that was interesting about Chrono Trigger is when they were making that game, they were specifically trying to make a mainstream RPG.
Hmm.
And with that in mind, they were trying to simplify the game so that someone who had never played an RPG before would be able to play it through start to finish.
Hmm.
And so that actually left it to be somewhat of an easy difficulty game. You didn't have to grind very much in
Yep.
it.
Yep.
Um, and and for the people that were very experienced, it was something that you could casually kind of go through and experience the story and
Mhm.
appreciate all the rest of it, which was in my opinion extremely well done too. Like everything from the music to the art.
Hmm.
Um, but then yeah, they introduced that completely new battle mechanic where you can walk around and you can avoid most enemies,
Yep.
and then there's no battle screen transition,
Yep.
and then you get to like really focus on who the characters are in your party because you've got your techniques, your dual techniques, and your
Yep.
triple techniques and stuff. So
And the idea of proximity or location being important, like if the enemies were grouped together in a corner, you'd use this
yeah,
technique because it like damages people over a range and stuff like that. I thought it was clever, and that was what
yeah,
made that was to
they
me the big thing about it that made it interesting.
yeah, and so I actually read a design uh, reverse engineering guide or whatever of that game.
Okay.
I don't know what you want to call it. I'm trying to find the name of it right now. It was called Reverse Design Chrono Trigger.
Okay.
I mentioned last year how I had bought like a collection of like reverse design books. So
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
Final
yeah.
Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, Final
Yep.
Fantasy VII. Anyway, so I read through that one in December, I think, and it was kind of interesting to read that breakdown of like how the mechanics and the story very much worked together very harmoniously.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, that's the ideal case. Like, I'm sure me and you can both agree that's the pinnacle of, a well-built game.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's definitely. I mean, that's what sells something, right? Is
Mm.
I think that blend between the flavor and the mechanics. Like going back to Tetris, I liked Dr. Mario. Uh,
So did I.
that's it's a very similar game. Like there's Yoshi's Cookie and there's I don't know, I guess
Wario's
eventually Candy Crush and
Woods,
all that stuff, right?
Yoshi. Oh yeah, yeah. Candy Crush.
Uh, like it's
Some.
all very stylistically stemming from the same thing, but it's like I I think Dr. Mario is the only one of those that I liked, and it was one part the game mechanics, like having to match the colors to clear the stacking stuff, but it was also the other part of like this cute character that I'm familiar with, who's a doctor and the little viruses and the pills and stuff like that. Combination of the flavor and the mechanics really won me over. Whereas Tetris is blocks falling from the sky. It just it was I felt like it's more of a toy than a game, I guess. Like it's
Okay.
something you can play with and get a little bit of enjoyment for a little while, but it's not something I ever want to go back to.
Interesting. So I can see that, and part of me feels that way too. Of course, like I do enjoy flavor very much, and I mean it's what you remember, right? When people start talking about Dr. Mario, you immediately get that tune in your head, and you can just
Yeah.
picture Mario throwing the pills. So I get it entirely. Um, I guess it's like so for me. I don't know if I was like, I mean, kind of rating a game and putting it down as a number is a weird thing because there's just so many things to
Yeah.
consider. But just as a kind of something to use as a starting point, um, I almost think of it like how can I explain this? Like, like in in like a multiplicative way, kind of. I guess like I feel like okay, so imagine this. Maybe this is complicated and weird. Oh, well, I'll say it anyway. Okay, imagine
Okay.
you had to rate the game in various places, and then you can kind of
Yeah.
add them or multiply them to get a result. I would think like the kind of the game mechanics and the gameplay, I would give between maybe a 0 and a 1, and then rate the flavor from like say 1 to 2, and then
Right.
multiply those together and kind of scale them out to get like if you wanted it to be out of 10, you could do it that way. Does that make sense? Kind of like
Right.
so like if I guess my point is if the game
Yeah, yeah.
mechanics are like 1 out of 1, then the flavor is really poor, looks ugly, looks terrible, so it's 1 out of 2. You'd still get like a 1 out of
Yeah.
2, I guess. Whereas if the
Yeah, I
flavor
mean
and the game
that's
were there. Yeah. So
yeah.
if the gameplay was really poor, so it was like, oh, I just hate this, I give it a 0. No matter how good the flavor is, it can't save it because when you multiply
Yeah.
them, you still get 0. So it's like a base that needs to be there, and then the flavor can, in this analogy anyway, like double
Yeah.
the value of the game, but it can't make the game.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely appreciate it along that sort of thing.
Yeah. So
Whereas I think the traditional way that companies would rate games is like one of my favorite rating systems was GamePro.
I knew you'd say Game Pro with the guys like the guy
Yeah,
with his hair like bunching
yeah,
up and he looked super
yeah,
excited or giving the thumbs down. Yeah, that was fun actually as a
yeah.
youngster. Like, yeah,
But like that was super fun, and they did it that way too, where they would like rate the music and rate the
yeah,
graphics and stuff, and then they just added it all together
yeah.
and then divided to get the average. So yeah, I agree with you. It doesn't completely work on an additive scale like that.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. I mean, there's other ways to do it too. You could weight them, like maybe
yeah,
like 50% of the score comes from the game play or whatever. But I don't know, like when the Game Pro, it was fun, but I don't think it made any sense. Like they
yeah,
talk about controls. It's like I get it. That's something you should very much value, but it's so like dependent with some of the other things, like the gameplay and the controls. How are those kind of different, you know?
yeah.
I don't know.
We should try to invent our own rating system, and then we can both play Ultima at the same time and
Fill in the numbers and turn them out and see what happens.
fill in the shocked faces.
Yeah. Oh, we totally should, man. Yeah, yeah. You're anticipating shocked faces for Ultima.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it'll be especially great because we'll give the emotive responses on a podcast where no one can see our faces.
I'm doing that occasionally as we talk about games. Actually, every time I hear the word lunar, I'm making an awful face. Believe me. Speaking
Yeah,
of lunar though, with the multiplicative scale I
yeah,
just said, like if I literally hate the game because I just found the gameplay so boring and I give that a 0, then it's a 0 for me, right? Nothing about the
yeah,
flavor can save it.
yeah,
Yeah. Whereas like Tetris under my scale, I guess, like just I'm if we can say it's a good mechanic to build upon and we can say that's good and then there's no flavor, it's still you can see that as a valuable game under
yeah,
that scale. I guess what it comes down to for me is I hate feeling like I'm just being fed stuff. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
using Lunar as my golden example, like it was literally like I'm just being fed story. Like why not? Why don't I just watch a cartoon? You know, like
yeah,
there's media where that approach is just how it works. Maybe like a film
yeah,
is a it's an audio visual experience that is static. People have already decided the sequence of frames and the audio they're going to feed you, and here you go. And so a
yeah,
game is a chance to incorporate mechanics and I guess user choice and have that impact how things happen. How did they
mm,
use that to build a product that's interesting? How does that increase the value of this product? And I would argue that with Lunar, it didn't do anything. They literally broke up the story and pushed events farther apart and gave you a very boring task to do in between.
yeah. I can't remember the game well enough to remember whether player choice, like if the player had any agency to actually change anything. Um,
Right.
which I guess is what it's interesting because like Final Fantasy IV is still one of my favorite RPGs,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
that's a game where you don't have control over who's in your party at any time. Like
Yep.
you have your characters and you're playing through a story basically. Like there are some spots where you can get out and explore and find some extra treasure or something, but it's a story. And I really liked that, but yeah, there's also the whole world of like Final Fantasy VI,
Yeah.
where you get to that second half of the game and you could beat the game with three characters, or you could, you know, recapture every character that you had
Collect
previously
them all.
in any order that you want. And so it definitely feels like you have much more agency in and control over the what the game is,
Right.
which I guess is especially what's popular now with the sandbox games with like GTA and stuff. And
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Final Fantasy is an interesting case in point, I think, because I'll let you speak to your own tastes, but I
hmm
very much loved 3 and 5, which I believe you did not.
yeah,
Now 4 to me, I mean, in my kind of how I describe Lunar, there's a bit of that where it's like you say, it's a story that they set out to tell a story and
yeah,
build characters. But 4, I mean, I'm not going to just go against everything I just said. It was just done so well. I mean, the game, I didn't really feel it was dull. Like it was more of the same in a way, perhaps, but like the battles were interesting enough, and like you had to, even though you were given your party, you had to like choose the right spells, and it was tactically
yeah.
interesting enough. But the setting and the story were just so well done and so much fun. I do love 4, but 3 and 5. So when people don't like them, they're always like, it looks bad or the story was so bad. How come 5 had such a bad story after 4? And I agree actually entirely. But what I liked about those games was very much the mechanics and how like the party system made it interesting, and like I guess it felt
Mm.
like the point of the game was different, if that makes sense. Like if I can talk about 3 a little bit, there's parts of the game where it's like you get isolated in this prison area and you can't get out, and so you have to like switch to a certain class, and then they can use magic, and then you can shrink yourself, and you have to walk through this area as a shrunken, like a mini person or whatever. And then,
Yeah, I very briefly remember that.
yeah, and then you have to switch to another class because the boss is only weak against that, and then you have to switch to like you could probably leave one healer in your party to heal because they're going to hit you, but then they might do this other thing because they have a really strong magic, so you might want to put a magic guy and he'll cast reflect, and the other people will be dragoons and jump. Like there was a lot of tactical interesting things you could do. And so
So
yeah, the story of 3 might have been weak, but I loved that feeling of always being like kind of on the edge and having to play a game to survive instead of just hit buttons to survive, if you know what I mean.
I the only thing I can remember about 3 is that you start on a floating island and you end up fighting a cloud as the boss of the game.
Did you play the remake or the original?
The remake.
I hated the remake, and it was because of the flavor, really. I just hated the cutesy cover they put on everything, and I just,
Yeah.
which, I don't know, like maybe you would have also hated the original, but if flavor is important to you, I feel they were two entirely different games, entirely.
Well, I feel like maybe it's like a case of Citizen Kane where if I had been there at the time, I would have appreciated a lot more.
I think there's a large element of that, yes.
But for me, I played Final Fantasy 3 for the first time after I had already played stuff like 4, 6, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy Tactics, right?
Yeah, I for the
So,
most part played them in order. I mean, I beat them in order,
yeah.
believe it or not.
Which is why like I try to start games like Ultima at the beginning now
Right.
instead of jumping straight to the end because
It's a big
for
reason for
exactly
me
that
too.
reason.
Yeah.
Like you can appreciate a lot more when you do it in sequence instead of jumping
Yeah.
backwards.
That probably
Um,
actually ruined Final Fantasy 3 and 5 for everyone in the West. Like everyone played
yeah,
Final Fantasy 7 and they're like, "Oh, let's go back and play these games." And 6 was still, I mean, it was Super Nintendo and you can see the blocks, oh my god, but
yeah,
it was like people were like, "Oh, I can see this came before Final Fantasy 7." Pretty much all the
yeah.
other ones were like, what is this?" Whereas if you've been playing those kind of games your whole life already, it wasn't
Yeah.
such a, stretch.
So I feel like stuff with like 3, I seem to recall where you're saying like you go through the cave and then you have to switch your jobs and stuff to be able to take on the boss. It's like I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong because it's been so long since I played it, but I feel like the game did a bad job of coaching the player into what jobs they needed for those bosses and stuff. It's just like you play through and then you get to the boss and then you die and you have to try to then reverse engineer what went wrong and try again.
Mm.
Whereas I feel like mm, a lot of the time now games have been built like Chrono Trigger is a great example of where like if you're gonna fight a boss that's weak against a specific magic or whatever, it's like the dungeon leading up to that gives you a little bit of a flavor of that to kind of train you how to use your techniques and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's something that's not as obvious as fucking Mighty Number 9 or Mega Man 8 or whatever, where they're like coming in and telling you exactly what you need to do.
God, don't get me started on Mega Man 8. God, that game. God.
Yeah.
Seems like everything
Uh,
that's part 8 is just a travesty. Oh my God.
yeah.
So I think that's a very valid point. You're right.
And it's something that makes sense. Like I said, if you play it at the time, you've never
Yeah,
had any better. They hadn't refined their techniques, and
exactly.
you can appreciate it. But it's definitely harder once you've played Final Fantasy Tactics to go back to Final Fantasy V for the first time.
I do agree. I mean, I like to. So this is at the very start of the conversation where you were talking about Citizen Kane. This is kind of for me where I think I'm more willing to put myself or try as much as I can to put myself in the context of the time and draw from the experience as
Yeah.
much as I can in that sense. So with film, if I'm watching something from like the 30s and it was like so it was supposedly so terrifying when it came out, obviously it's probably super tame now, but I try and kind of, I guess, empathize with that audience and just understand what it was that was interesting about the film, at least, and its historical significance. So you're enjoying yourself and you're having fun, but in a very different sense. And I understand that, and I understand why that doesn't work for some people or works to different degrees. As you have just said, I also, part of why I'm always like playing things in order, or like I'm so focused on all these old games, or like maybe I want to play this new game, but I know that it took a lot of influence from this older game, so I'll play that first, is exactly that reason, right? I want to build that story in my own mind. So my experience with particularly Final Fantasy 3 was I played it like in the mid 90s. I'd played 4 and 6 and 7, but I hadn't beaten them. I enjoyed them a lot. I did play through Chrono Trigger. I had played through Chrono Trigger, but still, I don't know, it felt like a lost gem, I guess. Like we in the West never got this, right? And so there was that appeal that kept me going, and just playing the game and putting myself in that context kind of I guess purposefully instead of just, oh, this game sucks. Like
Yeah.
thinking, well, it's old. Let's forgive some of these rough points. I was able to very much enjoy it, and plus I had already played 1 and 2, and I'd played Dragon Quest 1 and 2 and 3, and you can see
Mm.
how groundbreaking it was compared to the other games, like its sibling games at the time. Like it was just very. If it was 1990 right now,
Yeah.
and that was all you had, then it would be, I think, a very awesome game, very very
Yeah.
awesome game. Yes.
Yeah. I'm totally on board with that. And
Yeah.
and just because I know Dragon Quest is like one of the most popular RPGs in Japan, I
Yeah.
must admit that 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, I didn't like any of them. 4
And
is
the
one of my
you
favorite
listed.
games of all time.
You know what's funny? In Japan, you might have heard this a million times already, but 3 is the one that's like so super famous. Everyone went crazy. They had to,
Yeah.
set a new law up because people were like
People were skipping school.
Yeah, and so on and so forth. You didn't like 3?
I can't. Is that the one where you have jobs?
Yes, it is. And you go to the guild or whatever. Oh, it's been a while since I played it. You go to the.
You know, I remember kind of liking it, and then I think like the first, like I rented that as a kid, got nowhere with it, and then I bought it in high school, I think maybe, and then I played it for like 3 hours, and then I think you bought it from me.
Yes. Wait, 3. That probably happened, yes. And I bought number 4 from our local game store, the Batter's Box.
Yeah.
And it was $35, which is, at the time, was crazy maybe, but now the game is
Yeah.
worth like 90 or just some crazy amount, so.
Yeah.
Yes, and the guy I remember at the time was like, trust me, this is a great price. And I was like, okay. And I think
Well, I bought 1, 2, 3, and 4 for $50.
that's a great
And
price.
I was like, man, that's amazing. I love number 4. I haven't played the others enough. I'm gonna play through them. And I remember hating 1 and giving up on it. I didn't try 2, and then I tried 3 and got a little bit into it. And then I had like told you in art class that I was playing it, and then you're like, I've been looking for that game really hard. It's so rare. I can't find it anywhere. I'll give you $50 for it. And I was like, okay.
This is the guy in Peru. I don't remember a number. I do remember buying it from you.
I remember it being 50 because I
That's
remember
hilarious.
specifically I bought all 4 of them for 50, and then you offered me 50 for the third one, and I was like,
That's
how can I
hilarious.
not take this?
That's really hilarious. That might have happened. I remember buying number 2 off of eBay in
Yeah.
pristine condition, and I was like, this is it. I bought a like practically brand new game. It's so awesome. And then when I got it, I was afraid to play it because I didn't want to scratch it up. So it's like, what's the point? But Dragon Quest, well, going back to the conversation at hand, I mean, that's very much a flavor focused series. There's just not a lot of
Yeah.
interesting mechanics, and that's their thing.
that's
It's
the
like
thing.
they've intentionally stuck with that. Like you play number whatever 9, 10, whatever, and it's like still the same stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's
And so that's what I found interesting about it is like the mechanics really weren't that different between 2,
Yeah.
3, and 4, and yet the flavor in 4 was so different that I absolutely love that game.
That's very interesting. I'm interested. I'm different in that. Let me see. I really enjoyed number 1 because it was the very first game like that I'd ever played, that kind of RPG-ish game. And I actually liked how simple it was, I guess. Like in playing subsequent games where you have a party and there's this deep story and stuff. Dragon Quest 1 or Dragon Warrior 1 or whatever, it just felt like you could just play it in a weekend and beat it. And something with that simplicity for whatever reason just appealed to me, I guess. Now it would be maybe a challenge to hop in. I don't know, actually. I can understand why someone else would play it and be like, oh, right. But 2, I think you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice by skipping 2. That's my honest opinion. 2
so
was a
my-
lot of fun.
I do want to play that. I remember playing 2 and I got to like I remember having a boat in it.
Oh, you played it a while then. Did you fill your whole party, all 3 people?
I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 people that I had in my party, but I remember having a boat, and then my contract at work ended and I realized that I was going to be moving to Australia. And so that was the point where I sold all of my Nintendo and Super Nintendo stuff because I was just like, I can't have this massive collection and take it around the world.
Yeah.
So that was I don't know, it's like a situation where like you're a kid and you rent the game and you have it for a couple days and at the end of that time period you just have to take it back.
Bittersweet, bittersweet.
Yeah.
Okay, well, two. I liked the flavor, I guess. Like the music was really cool and the story was interesting. And
Mm.
if you like hate one with a fiery passion, then two is
I
close
really didn't
enough
like one.
to that maybe that you'd be like, eh. But it had a party and it had some interesting new mechanics and well, not really. For Dragon Quest, it had some interesting
Interesting for the
stuff.
time.
Yeah, interesting for the series and the time. And then I don't know, the music and the story was a lot of fun. So, but yeah, Dragon Quest it's kind of a poster child for what I'm talking about in a way. I think the formula's okay, but
Yeah.
the series never innovated
Grew.
on that. Yeah, and I that's intentional to my understanding, but for the way I feel about games in general, it just doesn't really work for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I remember getting Dragon Quest 7 on the PlayStation.
and
Um,
putting like 200 hours into it because it
yeah,
went
I
on
think I th
forever.
I think that was the first game that I had ever played where the in-game clock went above 100 hours.
Oh wow, yeah.
Like Final Fantasy up to that point, like what if you reached 99 hours, which I don't think I ever did, but
I
it
think it
just
stopped,
stopped
didn't it?
there. Like it just couldn't go any higher.
You could beat most of them in 30, or like if you're a
Yeah.
completist, I don't know, 60. Like Tactics had more stuff, but like, how could you put 60 hours into
Yeah.
Final Fantasy 4? I don't think you could unless you maxed
Yeah.
out all the levels and stuff.
Yeah, you'd have to just be like ridiculous about trying to get
Get every
adamant
item.
armor or something.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so Dragon Quest 7, I remember playing that for like 107 hours, and I got to the boss of the game, and I lost to him, and then I was like, okay, well, I clearly need to get a different job and learn different skills or something, and I got a job, and it's like it takes you so long to grind those skills in that game that I was
Yeah.
just like, fuck it, I'm just never gonna beat this game.
Yep. Ever play Star Ocean? Any of them?
No.
The first one was like this. It was a late stage Super Nintendo game, so it was beautiful, like just beautiful 16-bit, fun game, pretty cool. Then they pretty quickly made a sequel on PlayStation, so it was an early PlayStation game, so it was like ugly
Mm.
and but I've played through the second one and it was the same thing. It was just so much grinding and so much. I forget how many hours I put into it, maybe 80 or something, but.
I did it as a kid. Like I remember grinding all my materia in Final Fantasy VII to level that up. Uh, and I don't know. Like I remember getting adamant armor and like I never got around to uncursing the cursed shield in Final Fantasy VI, where you've got to do 250
Oh
fights with it
God.
equipped.
I think I,
But
I think I like loaded a hack game just to see it or something.
yeah, but like yeah, back in junior high and high school, it's like when I had a summer and no job, and my parents were at work or whatever. Like I could afford to just sit there and kill time like that. But
Yeah.
as an adult, like if I have to grind, it's just a complete turn off.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That kind of thing also must inform game design too, because I mean, back then it was like games, that's for 12-year-old males.
Yeah,
Make exactly something that they will and can play and put tons of time in.
yeah,
Now it's like, let's be inclusive, and there's like 40-year-olds playing it. Like, I don't think
yeah,
that kind of thing is ever going to repeat itself.
yeah. Yeah, well, I don't know. I guess the MMO world is still big on grinding.
Yeah, well, I don't
But
think those
but
target
that's
busy
that
adults.
yeah, but that's like literally what grinding is, right? It's like
Mhm.
i if you're grinding for items, at least it's a gambling process, so it just
Mm.
kind of feeds that addiction, which is a game mechanic. But I don't know.
Uh,
I've never really fed into that.
Yeah, I don't. If it's something that's you're not really using your mind and you're not growing and it's not teaching you anything, I find it hard to get into. Like just television in general or things like gambling. I don't know. So when the game mechanic is based around feeding me meaningless information or just making me gamble, as you say, I get turned off pretty quick.
Which takes me back to why I don't like Tetris.
Gambling? Yeah.
Not so much gambling, it's just that it's feeding me meaningless information. Like you are building up reaction time and learning to solve the puzzles in a way, but yeah, without
I
that
can,
flavor.
yeah, I can
It,
understand, but like Tetris, for example. So I've played that competitively against people, where like,
yeah,
you want to get when you do well, it fills their side with stuff, and it's a lot of fun actually. It's like playing a fighting game. I
yeah,
can make the same argument, right? Imagine Street Fighter 2, whether you like it or not. Just imagine you took away all the flavor. I even for me, it would be less fun, of course, and
yeah,
less interesting. But
yeah.
even
Of
then,
course.
like if it was 1990 and people were saying, "Look, we're working on this game. Just imagine what it's going to be like." But here's kind of the principle. I could probably kill an afternoon with blocks jumping around testing this guy's game if it's Street Fighter 2 and it's brand new, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know. Tetris, I think you could dump all the flavor you want on it, but the core is there, I guess, for me, like in a
Yeah,
competitive sense. Sitting
yeah.
alone and trying to get somewhere with it is like nothing to me. That to me is like, it feels like practicing, I imagine. I don't know.
You know, the one game that's like that I was able to put tons of hours into
Hmm.
was Super Hexagon.
Super Hexagon. Okay. So what's the
It's
difference? Is the flavor? It's the music? It's the something?
the music I absolutely loved. I think
It was.
Chipzel is like the best chiptune musician out there right now.
Mm,
Uh, the graphics were incredibly simple, but they did their job, I
appealing.
think.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, it kind of like builds adrenaline that like you're immediately in there fast and stuff. But there's also a sense of completion. Like there's a goal last a minute.
Yeah.
Whereas Tetris, I felt like there was just no goal.
That's fair. I mean, again, I think this is a case of like, if you look at Tetris in the context of its time, they were still working on things like that, right? Like
Mm,
game design ideas and stuff. Not just giving Tetris the free pass,
mm,
but I think that particular aspect is certainly. I agree with you that Super Hexagon accomplished it much better.
yeah.
Yeah.
All
Yes.
right. Well, I guess we are still
Time.
just as we're still just as set in our ways as we were when we began the conversation.
um,
But at least we understand each other's point of view.
That's true. I was gonna just as a concluding topic. We've mentioned Sprixelsoft a few times, and it's like
Uh-huh.
a topic for the future. It's obviously the game company we worked on together, or were part of together. I'll say.
Yeah.
This is interesting in retrospect because I think this very much informed our approach to the game design. Right? Like
Oh
I feel
yeah.
like at the time, like I was so focused on like how the game would play and stuff, and like from the get go, you were like, okay, I'll work on the story. I'll do this. I'll do that.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It like at the time, I guess I maybe I didn't fully understand. I thought we should move the whole conversation back to mechanics and kind of get there with the story. I don't think that now, but it's interesting talking to you now, and I can really put things in place looking back on kind of the approach we took
Yeah.
then. So, but like I said,
Well,
yeah,
I felt like we had done design stuff, and it was at a point where I very much could imagine what the game was that we were going to play, and I felt like it was pointless to worry about that anymore until we actually had a working prototype to be able to refine. Whereas
fair.
I felt like putting the effort into the flavor of the music and the level layouts and the character designs and animations and stuff. I felt like that was stuff that was just going to take an immense amount of time.
Yeah.
And
Well, now I agree with you, and
yeah,
I think there was like maybe through different phases of the project, I felt differently at different times. So I
mm,
can't say like what you're speaking of felt very much true at closer to the end of things where maybe earlier it was different. But anyway, like I had said, conversation for a different time for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All
Great.
right.
All right.
Well, good talking to you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I might slip in another 10 minutes of sleep before I start my day. See, this goes back to the whole like, how do you fit anything in your life when you're kids? The answer is like, don't sleep. That's the only answer
Yeah.
I've really like consistently come up with.
Yeah.
So,
So, like last time, I mentioned how we'd gotten similar amounts of sleep because I'd stayed up till 2.
yeah.
Uh, and I had that luxury because my family was on vacation, and so I basically had spent the week doing stuff. Like I saw a couple movies. I saw, what was it? Silence, which we briefly talked about, and then
Yeah.
I saw Arrival, which was like, I feel like that's one of the best movies I've seen.
Really?
Um, it started off and I felt like I knew exactly what was going to happen immediately, and I successfully predicted the next like 5 minutes of the film.
Mm.
But then from then on, things went in a slightly different direction, and increasingly went in a different direction, and so I really enjoyed it. It had amazingly well composed shots, and the story was great, and it was different. So I highly
Cool.
recommend that film.
Cool. Okay. Well, I will acquaint myself.
And it's one of those things where I've basically stopped watching trailers entirely.
Hmm.
Since I let myself get overhyped with the Final Fantasy VIII, I've basically stopped paying attention to as much hype as I can before I actually get to either watch a movie or play the game.
That was like 20 years ago, man.
I know.
That was like over half your life ago.
Yeah, and that was a turning point. Like I was so hyped for that, and then so disappointed that I vowed to live my life differently from then on.
I think that also did it for me for games. Like that was the first time. That was the first time I let myself get that excited, and I think the last, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole reason I was able to stay up till 2, and I hadn't played a video game in almost 2 weeks by that point, so I just stayed up and played Dragon Age Origins for like 5 hours.
Nice.
And
Wow. That's been a while. I can't wait till that I can do that again. I'd have to get up at like 2 to do that.
well, I guess you're gonna maybe wait another 3 years.
We'll see. We can make this new little bundle of joy a wonderful sleeper as quickly as possible. And yeah, right. Yeah, but my point, I guess, was just like my wife yesterday was like, so we're going to the aquarium today, and she's like, oh, let's leave early. So I'm gonna set my alarm. I'm gonna get up at 7:30. I was like, okay, great. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, so I'll get up at 6:30 then to do this. All
Yeah.
right. So we're gonna do a podcast for how long? Well, maybe I'll get up at 5:30. Just like
Yeah,
I like adjust my schedule such that I have a life.
yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, I'll let you. Now that I've just taken up 2 minutes, I'll let you have 8 minutes of playing a game or going to sleep.
Awesome. All right, brother. Cheers till next time.
All right, catch you later.